All right, we're back. It's COMP229, fall 2016. It's lesson 1, part 3 of our broadcast. And we've had varying degrees of success, mostly failure, to log into Microsoft Azure. And that's okay. And again, the process is kind of convoluted. It's changed a little bit. I'll tell you this, that Microsoft's very good about answering emails and giving you support. So whenever you need to do connect to Microsoft and get access to Azure and so on, it's not that difficult to do. You just have to persevere. It's usually a step that we're missing. Sometimes it's a conflict with your Outlook account from school. Sometimes that's the problem. And the Outlook account that you've signed up with Microsoft. So sometimes what I'd like to do is go in with an incognito window, right? If I click on New Incognito Window and log in through here, it sometimes, and I'm saying sometimes a lot, prevents Microsoft from thinking that you're logging in with your school account. Because your school account, example, because we use Office 365, can clash with this new Office account, right? This new Microsoft account. So that might be the problem. Microsoft will direct you, however. Just be patient, and you will be able to set up Microsoft Azure. Again, it's part of our course. We'll do everything to do to support you. I will also send up a support request to Microsoft to see if there's a better process that I can send you guys over Slack. Okay? So bear with it. Again, every year is slightly different. Every semester is a little bit more compressed. So we'll see what happens. All right, so let's suppose that you got it going somehow, right? And you're watching this video and you've already got it going at home. You went home and it didn't work at school, but when you got home, everything worked great, right? Let's just say. So you want to try and do what I just did. You want to kind of run locally. Again, I'm running my server here, right? And attached to this to the demo that I've been doing, up online on eCentennial, I've also deposited a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation, right? Which looks like this. It's in PDF format, so you can access it anywhere. So this is the book we're using. Again, it's a little old, but it'll serve us fine, right? Because the concepts are the same, right? So what we've covered so far is what is ASP.NET. Let's cover that a little bit. Again, I want you to think about ASP.NET is using object-oriented program methodologies with C# as the back end to our pages on the front end. All right? So that's what we're using ASP.NET for. Okay? Don't worry, there's only 20 pages. I try and make my PowerPoints as short and sweet as possible. Use this as a reference card. Okay? I'm not going to read all these PowerPoint presentations. They're for you. If I ever test you on a quiz about any kind of concepts, I'm only going to talk about the stuff that I put up on the PowerPoints. If I don't put it on the PowerPoints, even if it's in your book, it's no good. I'm not going to test you on it, right? If I haven't talked about it, you're not going to get quizzed on it, all right? So don't worry. All right, so again, client-side technology. When we talk about client-side technology, we're talking about HTML5 and CSS3 and JavaScript. JavaScript, if you don't know JavaScript and you're a web developer, something's wrong. We need to know JavaScript these days in the modern web. Microsoft makes use of JavaScript, right? But what it also takes care of is it renders the pages. I want to use that word render. It renders the pages by taking a master page, like a site master that we saw, plus some kind of default or other pages, smashes them together, and then comes out with the page, the final page later on. And we're going to see that next week when we talk about server controls. So server-side technologies, like we talked about, the difference between server-side and client-side, we talked about different solution stacks, right? We're working in this course with the Microsoft solution stack, which is IIS, Internet Information Services, Express, right? SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, and ASP.NET. That's the solution stack. Those three technologies are able to serve up pages from from Microsoft. Now, can you do it with your student web? Yes, you can. Will it work nicely? No, it won't. And it's not really accurate. That's why I'm not recommending it. You want to use something like a service like Azure. Why? It's modern. It uses cloud computing, which I want you all to learn. By the way, this is not the last class you're going to have about cloud computing. There's a separate course just around cloud computing that one of our other professors is putting on. But this is a great lead into that. You're going to learn about it here and then reuse it again and again throughout your time at Centennial. All right. Okay. What does it look like again? And I'm going to kind of zoom in here so you can see more. I always want you to think about everything we do in the cloud as a request response. And everything that's handled by the server, when you come from your client, and this is a bad picture, but if you come from your client to the server and back, I want you to think about this as a round trip. So think about that. Every time we do a request, I do a request and I get a response from the server. It's a round trip. If I do a lot of round trips over and over again, it's going to be really slow, the page, right? This is one of the problems Microsoft has with web forms. Web forms is a little older technology. We can make it a little nicer with some of the things we make it look like. For example, we can use Bootstrap to make it look nice. But at the end of the day, web forms does a lot of request responses. You're going to see a lot of that more with web forms than anything else, right? Actually, it's very similar to PHP in its response time. PHP in general, slow. Web forms, slow. WordPress, slower, right? We want to, and because of the engine that it uses. The more modern stuff, MVC, ASP, Node.js, those kind of technologies, faster, right? So we've been migrating slowly, and this is the journey that you're going to be taking. This is one of the steps in your journey to learning about all the different web technologies. You're going to get to the more modern stuff, but it's going to, you need to understand all the other middle steps in order for you to get there. All right. We're not going to talk about what a web page is, but I want you to think about generally when we made web pages in JavaScript or in other courses that we've done together, a lot of times they're what we call static pages, right? Now, I want to tell you this also. This is where I disagree with the book. I really don't like the word dynamic. Dynamic is a kind of a catchphrase or flashy word to say that the server is serving up data or content, right, for you to make our page more interactive, if you will. I like the idea of the interactive web more than dynamic. Dynamic is not really a great word to use, right? Not anymore, not in the modern web. Maybe in Web 1.0, it used to be the right word, but not anymore. Interactive and adaptive are better words for us to use. And the way it's interactive is it interacts with the server. So a request goes out to the server, the server processes your request, and then returns a response in the form of a rendered web page so that we can see. All right? That's how it works. And very much so with ASP.NET technologies. There's a bunch of other programming technologies we can use, but we're using C#. C# is the language of the backend that we're going to be using. Okay? So if you ever get a quiz question that says, what language do we use on the backend on the code behind files? C# is your answer. I'm giving you ideas. If I ever do a quiz, like hint, hint, next week, probably I'm going to have a quiz to ask you questions about what's the backend language on that we're using with web forms. C# will be your answer, right? All right. One thing to understand is that when we use ASP.NET Pages, it's a compiled language. So we actually build and compile stuff on the back end, our C# pages on the back end, our code behind files. And they all have to be built and compiled and error-free in order for our front end to be functional, right? If our back end, our C#, and by the way, we're going to use object-oriented C# on the back end. If it's not working properly, forget the front end. It won't render properly, right? And a lot of times you'll get errors, okay? So that's something to understand too. And now they say it's a big jump in performance compared to the old days, but I have to say also that it's still, web forms had a long way to go compared to what we can do now with MVC, right? So at the time, yes, compared to classic ASP. By the way, classic ASP looks very similar to PHP, if you're familiar with PHP. And that's when we look at the stuff here. If I look at the directive that I saw, this directive here, I'm going to stop debugging for a second. This directive at the top of the page looks very similar to the kind of stuff we would do with PHP, except we would have less than $PHP. That's the only difference. And when we do that, whenever I use this syntax here, what I'm really saying is, hey, C#, this is what I want to do. I'm actually accessing the back end, right? Here's another thing that that I'm accessing the back end. For any control that has run at server, okay? That's telling ASP.NET to say, hey, go to the back end. I need you to do some processing on the back end, then come back with a response, right? Every time you see this run at. So imagine if I have not just one control, but 10 controls with run at, right? It's going to go back and forth and do a full trip over and over again, right? Which is a little slower, right? MVC doesn't work that way. And as we get through this course, you're going to see that it's much more efficient and more modern than web forms. Okay. So about compiled. I'm not going to talk about this one too much. And you can read about different options. You know, the great thing about web forms is it comes with a bunch of stuff built into it. Things like security, things like auto completion. And with Visual Studio 2015, it has a bunch of other code hinting and everything else that you can do in the backend. One thing that I will not be doing, if you notice here on the code editor, you also see there's this thing called design. Yes, it exists. And something that we see in the book, it says, here's our web developer, or there's something called web designer, right? Where you see, if I click on it, you get something like this. Almost like a preview. And if you've done Windows forms before, you might be forgiven to think that we can do drag and drop. Yes, we can, but here's the danger when we do drag and drop on the web. You don't know what you're going to get code-wise, right? We never do this. In the modern web forms, we never do drag and drop. It's available to us, right? Especially for non-web developers. You can use drag and drop to build your pages, right? For us in this course, for me, because you're students with my course, right? We're never going to do drag and drop ever in our course because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't, first of all, number one, it does not give you, it's not WYSIWYG. It's not what you see is what you get, right? Sometimes you'll see something here, drag and drop, and it may not be the same as what you get on the real page. And that kind of defeats the purpose. Why would we want to do that? A lot of drag and drop controls, when we drag and drop, what happens is we get default styling that comes into our pages. We don't want that. We want to control our styling. We want to separate our style from our structure because that's the right thing to do, right? So even though it's available to us here, we're never going to use it, ever, okay? Some other courses or other sections may use this kind of stuff, right? But that's the choice that the professor's making. In my course, this never happened, okay? Let's go back to this. And I'm not saying I'm trying to make it difficult for you. It's wrong. We don't do it in the modern, I do web forms for clients all the time, right? I update web forms all the time. We do a lot of revisions. I never do drag and drop, ever. It's just not done anymore. All right, so that's one thing. The other thing is the use of other controls. If I look at my toolbox on the left, right, here's where we can do drag and drop. Drag and drop on the code file, and I'm just going to set this up for the first time. We're going to talk more about this next week. So here's a bit of a preview of the stuff we're going to be talking about next week. We're going to talk about server controls next week. And one day when my little Visual Studio updates here, because it's doing it for the first time, right? In my toolbox, what I'm going to see in a few minutes, probably, right, is a set of controls. Come on, Visual Studio. All right, yeah, it's still working. I gotta wait. I got no patience. Okay, here it is. If you look at standard controls, one of the most standard controls you see. By the way, does this look familiar to you guys from a COMP229 perspective? You've seen this, right? You've done Windows forms, right? It's not the same, right? It looks familiar, but don't be fooled into thinking it's the same thing. It's not the same. But this is the great thing is it does operate the same when you double click on stuff. Okay, let's talk about this in a second, all right? So I want to have a label. Notice that there's a label right here, and I want to include it in my form over here. So now I'm dragging this label, and I'm pumping it into my form from a coding perspective. Hey, here's what it does for you. This is a great thing. One, it puts in the server control exactly the right way. Two, it also gives us a default ID. This is the ID. Think about this as an ID that's similar to Windows forms. We need an ID in order for us to code it, right? I'm going to call this label my hello label. Let's name this hello label. So hello label. This is a critical name. Why? Anything I use here from a naming perspective, I'm going to have access to on the code behind file on the back end. So I got to be very careful about how I code this thing. All right, so here's my code label. Not only can I do this, but Microsoft also gives us the ability to have properties just like we do with Windows forms, right? So this is where you can bridge your knowledge from Windows forms, from COMP229 to here to web forms. Web forms are slightly different. So I have a hello label, and notice that my text says label. Notice that my text attribute here, or my property, says label as well. Let's make this hello world. Right? If I enter it, you can do both. You can mix and match. You can mix and match HTML and ASP.NET for web server controls at the same time. Right? And we'll talk about this in a bit. So let's get rid of this, because we don't want to do this anymore, my H1 tag. Right? We'll just use a label. Right? Here's my label. And my label has got hello world. Right? Okay. Let's see what happens just by doing this. I'm not doing anything differently. Remember, on the front end, I'm putting a control. On the back end, because see how it says run at server for my label? It's going to go back to the server, check to see if I need to do anything with this label, and then come back. And when it comes back, it's not going to render an ASP label because browsers don't understand what this is. It's going to turn it, convert it into HTML. Let's see what it does. So I'm going to run this thing with debugging, and we're going to see our page on the front end for a second. And it's important to understand what you get back. Don't worry about what you see. That's the first part. What you get back, what's the real code that you're getting on the back end. Okay, so here's my hello world. We got hello world. It's not an H1 tag anymore. It's something else. What did we get back? Right-click, view source. Right, let's take a look. So again, we've got our HTML, right, the top of my page. And as I scroll down, right, I can see that I've got some inline script. Not totally happy with this, but it does some postback. We're going to talk about what postbacks are in a second. And as I keep scrolling down, I got my nav bar. Here's my nav bar, right? And then as I keep going down to my content section, right, I'm going to come to the point where I have my form, my stuff. So here's one. Here's my main content, right? Hello label, hello world. So in a span, that's what it gives us, a span with an idea of main content hello label. That's what I'm getting back. Is that what we want? Sometimes no. Now, there's different ways I can color this. I can color this with CSS. I can apply a class to it. I can do everything I can normally want. But if I want to make this an H1 tag, I got to wrap it in an H1, right? If I really want to, right? And again, it really depends on the kind of control that I want. So let's do that. So I'm going to stop debugging, and I'm going to take my label, and I'm going to wrap it in an H1 tag, right? So here's my H1 tag, right? I'm going to take my H1 tag, and I'll wrap it around my label, right? Let's just put this together nicely so it looks like it's on one line, right? And save, and I'm going to run without debugging. I'm going to Control F5, run without debugging this time, and you can see this time when I do that, I'm going to kill some of these because they're just the same thing over and over again. I get hello world back in with my H1 tag. So I'm getting the same thing back with a span that gives me my little, my content. Now why the span? Because I have control over what can happen to that label on the back end. Let's change that label. When the page loads, I want that hello label to change to something else. All right? How do we do that? So let's go back to Visual Studio. So again, we've talked about the front end, ASPX, but the back end, if I go to my Solution Explorer, and again, we're moving really slow, guys and girls, but don't worry. Here's my back end, and here's what it looks like on the back end, right? So here's what happens with everything. Anytime I look at a page on the back end, the code behind file, I get an event. I get an event that all pages have called the page load event. I can make other events too occur. My page load event happens every time the page loads. So I want to change it so that my label, my hello label, says goodbye, right? How do I do that? Well, I need to access my hello label. It's called hello label, because that's what I named it. So I start typing, and I get code hinting because of the ID that I put into on the front end, hello label. And now this is just C# dot text, the text attribute, is equal to goodbye, right? And you can do whatever you want here, or test, or whatever you want to put. Okay, cool. So this is my first piece of code, right? I'm looking at my hello label. I'm changing the text property. When the page loads, here's my page load event right here, right? So just a little bit of comments here I'm going to put in. So this method, executes every time the page loads. right? I'm just putting in some comments here, right? By the way, this triple forward comment style is the standard comment style for C#, right? You can also make it, instead of this, you can always use the /* methodology as well. This also works well with a summary tag, if you ever want to try this out. We're going to talk about this as well. If I go summary, okay, and inside the summary I can say something like this method loads or executes every time the page loads. Those are all good for comments every time the page loads. Okay, so I can do that as well. Now, why am I making the summary happen? Because if I want to reference my page load event, notice that I'm getting this description happening right here. Everything I type inside my summary also gets printed out inside when I hover over my method, or when I reference my method. Okay? I'm going to save the thing, and let's run it now. Control F5, run without debugging. Let's see what happens. So remember, it's going to make a round trip. I'm going to make a response to the server. I'm putting out a label. The label is going to go back to the back end, and when it loads, it's going to change my text for whatever I put to goodbye. It's going to render that result back to the front end after it comes back from the server. Okay? And the way I'm hooking into it, right, is the stuff that I put on the front end. So the front end looks like this, where I have an ID of hello label, and that's why on the back end it knows what this is, because I identified it on the front end. Okay? So both things have to match, the ID, and then I have access to doing the C# on the back end. If you know C#, this is why web forms are so easy to learn, because if you know C# and if you've done Windows forms, then web forms is just one step away, right? The only thing we're not doing is no drag and drop, because drag and drop is ugly, right? And we're beautiful people, right? We don't do drag and drop. Questions? We can do any operation that you're used to on the back end. I can build full classes with C# on the back end. We're going to do this, right? We can do all kinds of stuff on the back end to get information pumped out to the front end. Yes. We can use inheritance. We can use everything on the back end with creating a C# class and object-oriented programming techniques to make calculations and do all kinds of stuff on the front end. Okay? Not a problem. Something specific you can't do. Yes, there are some tricks. There's some things we need to do. There's some workarounds we have to do in order for us to make web forms work nicely for us. An example will be this: our site master page. I've talked about our site master page really peripherally right now, because we're going to talk more about our site master page later on. Our site master page gives us a look and feel of our pages, right? Here's something. Notice that I'm using my percent less than percent greater than the syntax, which is saying, hey, C#, right? Get my page title and put it into this title, my title tag. Where does this page title come from? It comes from here, right? Remember, in my directive at the top of my page, I mention a page title, right? So I say @page with my title attribute is home page. If I want to change this to something else, let's change it to landing page, right? As an example, you can do that. And then when I render the page, Control F5, run without debugging, you can see that at the top, instead of saying home page like it used to say, now it says landing page. So the title is actually, it comes from or derived from our directive, the directive at the top of the page. Okay? Our master page file controls the layout. Think about this as the layout of all of our pages. We may have several master pages. For example, I might have one for my landing page. I might have another for some other details pages. I might have a third for my contact page, because maybe I want those pages to look and feel differently than the rest of my site. Okay? So think about it that way. Also, if I'm logged in, I might have a different master page that's just for my navigation, right? That I can use. And I can also, we're going to find this out, nest master pages, one within the other, right? So you can create any kind of style and structure that you want. Now, some of you, if you're really familiar with the web, are like, but why? This is a lot of work for HTML5. I can do this way faster with HTML5. Why, Tom? The why is because it gives you security. That's one of the reasons why you would use web forms, right? It gives you a connection to the backend with C#. That's another reason why you want to do it instead of JavaScript. We don't have to use JavaScript with web forms. We don't need to. We could, especially from a validation perspective. If I want to do, client-side validation, I can still use JavaScript. But I always want to validate stuff on the back end because I can always turn JavaScript off on the front end. So if I want to break your validation, I just got to turn JavaScript off, and then I can break your code, right? But the back end, you want to do all your validation, my input validation on the back end. And C# allows us to do that very well. These are the reasons why we want to do it, and there's many others. If you skip through your PowerPoint presentation, it gives you some other examples here about how to build the same kind of stuff. I've given you kind of a step-by-step in your instructions about how to choose GitHub, or if you haven't done it, you can add to source control. Right? So if this is something for you to step through if you need to refer to some of the stuff I've talked about already. And if you want to add some code, I've also given you some examples of where, for example, in my page load event, I want to change my label text so that the date time is displayed. Again, you can send anything into the text method or the text property just like we did with Windows Forms. So anything that works on the front end, can connect to the back end. And there's many other events we're going to be talking about. So the PowerPoint's kind of short. It just gives you an intro into web forms, and it kind of gives you the way of how everything works. Okay, let's modify my site master, and then we'll take a break, and we'll stop for the day. So I got my site master, but it's pretty ugly. I got some stuff that works and some stuff that doesn't. I'm going to leave all this alone, right? Menu standards and blah, blah. We're going to talk about this. Do I really need all these scripts? Hell no. We don't need any of this stuff. We can direct whatever we want here in my script references as we like. This is built into our scaffold, and the scaffold includes additional stuff that we may or may not want. Okay, just FYI. Notice our navbar, right, isn't exactly what we want. We have application name. We want to call this maybe our first application or something else. We can do that. We can say first application. So this is inside of our, just giving you a kind of a insight into our site master page, right? And also, we have home, about, and contact. But maybe I don't want my home, about, and contact. Maybe I just want my home page. So let's kill my home, about, and contact links. Let's kill those, right? So I just have my home page. That's all I got, right? And hey, if I'm killing that on the master page, I don't even need them on in my Solution Explorer. So I can actually physically kill pages. It's not going to hurt anything. If I kill my contact page, let's just kill it. And let's kill my about page after that's done. So here's my about page. I'm going to kill that too, right? And all I have left is my default page, right? I have my bundle config. We'll talk about that later on. Bundle configuration is basically telling us what our bundles are. So here's my style bundle, which is my content, and we're going to talk about this later on, where I have my site CSS and Bootstrap CSS and so on. What if I want to add font awesome? I want to add a really cool font to my pages, right? How do I do that? Who knows what font awesome is? Anybody? It's like a web font, right? We use a web font for icons instead of getting images. It's much more efficient. So how do I do that? I could do that, but here's what I want to do. I'm going to right-click on my solution or my project, and I want to use NuGet. So I'm going to use my NuGet package manager. So I'm going to say manage NuGet packages. And what this is going to do is going to pull up a list of NuGet packages or packages that exist. Now, my NuGet package manager is like any other front-end package manager. It grabs stuff from the web and includes it as plugins into my website. That's what it does. I already have a bunch plugged in. For example, Bootstrap. My Bootstrap is 3.0. I can update my Bootstrap. Instead of my latest stable version, I can go to 3.3.7. I can update my Bootstrap by just clicking on Update. And what Microsoft Visual Studio will do is go out, grab the latest version of Bootstrap, and update this version to that version. Okay, cool. Here's other stuff we can do with it too, right? I'm just going to kind of undo these things for a second. Let's take a look at the other ones. There's other ones in here that we have too, right? Other packages that got loaded in when we created our scaffold, when we created this big project, right? We have a bunch of extra files. By the way, next week we're going to start from scratch. We're going to do things one thing at a time. We're going to create our default ASPX page. We're going to create our own site master pages from the get-go, and so we're going to format or scaffold out all our stuff by hand, right? But let's update some of these packages. And if you notice, we should also have jQuery. Now jQuery is at 1.10.2. Please do not update it to 3.10.0. or 3.1.0 because it's incompatible with Bootstrap 3.3.7. So please don't do that. Make it go to 2.2.4. That's the latest version of jQuery that'll work with Bootstrap. And then click Update, right? OK, once we do that, and it goes to 2.2.4 where we've updated jQuery, I'm just showing you how to update packages. We don't have to update all of them. And by the way, here's a career-limiting move. You know, what do they call it? A resume-generating event. If you're working for somebody and you update their packages on an existing website, you could break the site, which could get you fired. So please don't do this, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? If it's an existing website, leave it alone. Check with the web administrator or the lead tech to make sure that it's OK to update the site, because a newer package doesn't mean a better package. It might break something else, right? Because it's an existing website that's working. In this case, we don't really care. It's just a little hello world website. So if we change or update everything, it's OK, except for Bootstrap. Bootstrap would break if we did it that way. OK, but I want to add another package. I want to find something. So I click Browse, and I can look for Font Awesome. So I go Font Awesome. Oh, there it is. Now, there's different versions. I want 4.6.3. I'm going to click on this one and click Download. Right? So I'm going to install my Font Awesome. Cool, cool. When it's done, right? It's over. Successfully installed Font Awesome. And then when I've done that, you notice that there's a little check mark that says Font Awesome has been installed. Can I use it? No. I got to put it into my website, right? And the way to do that, of course, I'm going to close this off. Now that I've got it, and you can check for it, if I go to my Solution Explorer, and if you look at under scripts, these are all my scripts, right? But I also have under Content, Font Awesome. Here's my fontawesome.min.css. So this is my new library for my little fonts, right? Notice my bundle config also has my CSS. Content CSS is what it's called. I have Bootstrap and my site.css. Well, under my site.css, my Bootstrap, I can also include a path to show you this. This is a shortcut on how to do this to work with my bundler, right? I can do tilde content. I can look at, without the min.css, it'll minify it for me, font-awesome, right? Once I've done this, and I close off my tag, right? And I save it. Now it's included in the bundle. Notice that my style bundle, which is my CSS, will get loaded inside my site master. So at the top, there's going to be a point where it says, hey, load up that style bundle somewhere, right? Here it is. My bundle reference is content.css, which if you look at the bundle config says this is the alias for what I'm loading up, and it bundles all these CSS files all together in this order, right? We're going to talk about this way later in the course, how to do this. In the beginning, we're going to just create our site master manually without this stuff. This isn't required. It just makes life easier, which you'll see later on. OK, so we've got our Font Awesome. That's fantastic. How do I use this in my site master? I want to include Font Awesome. And if for those people who don't know Font Awesome, if we go to fontawesome.io, and if you look at different fonts we can download or search. So if I go to icons, and if I want to look for the home icon, so if I want to search for the home icon, here's home. I can see that I have an icon that's home. And if I click onto it, it tells me the code that I need. An I with a class of FA home. And if I take this I tag, copy it, and go back into my page, and let's say I want to put this into my my navigation. So here's my list item. And before I put my home tag, I want to put this I tag, right? Give it a little bit of a space. And I want to put FA-large, right? So it's going to be a large item. And again, this is just, we're going to talk about Font Awesome as we go too, as an extra little piece of technology. And let's check this out and see if it works. So Control F5. And if everything goes well, then not only should we have our links changed, our navigation is going to be slightly different because we've changed up our site master, but we should have a little home icon there too, right? There's Font Awesome. OK, this is nice, but it's only local. I want to pump this out to GitHub, and I want to update Azure so it reflects what we've done in our changes. How do I do that? Again, we're going to do this a bunch of times, but I'm going to go back to my Solution Explorer, and I'm going to click on Team Explorer. And if you notice, if I go home and I go Changes, it's going to show me all the changes that I made, right? So here's 45 changes that I made to my files. Why? Because I updated my Bootstrap with my NuGet package manager to the latest version. So this is showing me all the Bootstrap changes I made. I've added in Font Awesome, right? Which is a new package that I downloaded from NuGet, right? And here are all the different web fonts that I got and glyphs that I got from Bootstrap. I've also changed some stuff. I removed jQuery 1.10.2 and added in jQuery 2.2.4. This is just a reference of all the changes I made. Like I removed my About page and my Contact page. These are all the changes. So I'm going to say, again, made changes to my project. I'll say added Font Awesome. We'll do more descriptive changes later on. I just did a bunch of stuff at once. Commit all. I'm going to go home, and I'm going to go sync, and I'm going to go push. When I do that, it's going to go out to GitHub, throw it up on GitHub. And now, because Azure is watching with eagle eyes on what's happening to GitHub, I should be able to go to Azure. Let me go to Azure here. And here's my link, right? If I refresh, it takes a few minutes. If I refresh, I should see all the changes happen up on Azure when it's done. Because Azure's watching, and I have everything my remote is working exactly as my local. So it's full. That's a full trip for you, right? Questions? I know it's a really broad introduction about ASP.NET, but I always want you to think about this. Anytime I put a control, custom control that we see, like for example in my default ASPX, which is this ASP in the beginning, that says, hey, Microsoft, go to C#, get some help from the server, and render something new. Yes?
I have a question. Is bundle config a part of ASP.NET or Bootstrap?
ASP.NET.
Okay.
Right? Bundle config is just a file, and it's configured for this scaffold. By the way, we're not going to use it in the next iteration. When we do our next app next week, lesson 2, we're not going to use it. We're going to make it by ourselves. Our site master will start doing it from scratch, because one of your first assignments is going to be, hey, let's make a little mini portfolio site, right? Some of your first assignment. I know you're going to go crazy with the portfolio sites, right? But the reason why I'm doing this for you guys is this, right? You want to use this, build the same thing over and over again across different applications. Why? I want to make a game, right? Let's just say, if I build it in Unity, if I build it in Unreal, if I build it in any other engine that I want, if I'm making a game, if I made that game already, I know how to make it, how to score, how to collide, how to do everything. It's my Hello World project, right? My Hello World project for Windows Forms was my body mass index, my BMI tracker. Remember that one? That's my Hello World. And for people who are with me on COMP229, we made this thing, our BMI tracker, right, in COMP229. That is my Hello World application for Android, iOS, or any other kind of. If I can do it with Android, iOS, or Windows, I can do it anywhere. Stuff we're doing right here, we're going to make our own Hello World applications. So that doesn't matter what you do. And the Hello World application we're going to build is our mini portfolio site that you're going to do over and over and over again across different technologies, so you know how to do it. We're going to do it with this one, and we might even do it with MVC. Why? Because you already have content, probably some of you, for a portfolio. Take that content, spin it, and make it work with web forms. It's a good learning tool, right? It's a demonstration tool. It's not because I want you to make your portfolio with web forms. Not necessarily. If you want to, you can, right? You can make it really look nice. However, it's not for that. It's to learn web forms. That's why I'm going to make you do your portfolio. And that's the first application we're going to build together. All right, questions before we depart for the day? I think I'm exhausted. I've had technical problems all night. You guys are exhausted with Microsoft Azure. I think it's time to go. Any other questions? Okay, this is all going to be online like normal. Please, if you haven't signed up to Slack, please do that. It's a great communication tool. You can always send me a Slack anytime, up till about 10 o'clock. If I put my little guy down, I may not answer you, right? But during the day, if I have time, if you send me a Slack message directly, I will answer. Yes.
Do we have a quiz next week?
Maybe.
Maybe.
If we have a quiz, what am I going to do? I'm going to send you a Slack message, and I'm going to put it up on eCentennial at the same time. All right? Be prepared. All I want you to do is I'm not trying to make you crazy here, right? I'm trying to give you guys good with the technologies. So, stuff to prepare for next week. If you don't have your Visual Studio 2015 ready, let's say you want to make it ready for your laptop, don't do it in class, right? It's going to waste your time. Do it at home and bring it in afterwards, ready to go. It's better to have your laptop ready to go. Yes. I recommend Enterprise because you're going to have all the bells and whistles for the rest of the time you're here at Centennial, right? Might as well. DreamSpark, E5 on the hub, right? That little link. Take that link. You'd have to remove it and reinstall it. Yeah. So for your lab, yeah, that's a good. So for your lab, if you look at the lab requirements, there's 2 requirements for your lab. Make a GitHub account, make an Azure account, take this lesson one we just did here together. The simple example is Hello World. Take it, put it up on GitHub, send it up on Azure, prove to me that you can do the continuous deployment, and you got your 2%. If you only do GitHub, 1%. Okay, that's Friday. Okay, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.